On December 19th, 2025, the deadline arrived. For the first time in American history, Congress had passed a law with near unanimous support demanding the full release of Jeffrey Epstein's files. The vote was 427 to 1 in the House.
The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Whoever that one guy is, I think we should check his hard drive. This is the reason he voted against it, by the way, this is perfectly valid, but I think that we can also release the files and also do this, right? And after the shocking unanimous votes, even more shockingly, Trump signed it within 24 hours, which is a shocking shift from the previous attempts to shut down further inquiry, and it's quite far away from it being a Democratic hoax. It seems like. Either way, the law was clear. Release everything within 30 days. Release all the photos, release all the documents, and most importantly, release all of the names. Now, what the Justice Department actually released instead is something else entirely. At least 550 pages were completely blacked out. You've probably seen memes and videos of people doing this type of thing where, oh, 50 billion or whatever. You know what I'm saying? These pages were not partially redacted, they were completely covered in black boxes from top to bottom. Even a 119-page grand jury transcript was solid black on every single page. And then the next morning, files started disappearing from the government website listing all the files. For example, this file, a photograph showing Donald Trump's image that was visible on Epstein's desk. It was visible Friday and gone Saturday afternoon. More than a dozen files had been pulled without explanation. The explanation, though, seems kind of obvious. They forgot to put the black marks over them. Also, they didn't do that right either, which we'll get into. Within 48 hours, the same bipartisan lawmakers who'd written the transparency law were threatening to hold Attorney General Pam Bondi in contempt of Congress.
And Congressman Ro Khanna says that he and Representative Massey, again bipartisan here, are going to hold Attorney General Pam Bondi in contempt and have previously said they are considering impeachment.
Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna are pissed. Thomas Massey, by the way, is kind of becoming a local legend in the American government for being a guy who is honest, which is rare, it seems like. But Thomas and Ro have called for inherent contempt and have floated the idea of filing impeachment articles. Both had co-authored the bill together to get all of this released. And meanwhile, newly released photos showed Bill Clinton shirtless in a hot tub next to a person whose face had been blacked out, as well as swimming in a pool with Ghislaine Maxwell. And Bill's spokesman fired back, calling the release a scapegoat operation. I don't understand how at this point you can't see this as a total clown show. If you're a victim, it has to be even worse. Marina Lacerda, who was abused by Epstein when she was 14 years old, watched this happen and said it felt like a slap in the face.
I think all of us, if I can say, we are infuriated with this. And I feel like it's another slap in our faces.
And that she personally expected way more. And she's a literal victim of this. This is the story of what was supposed to be the most transparent document release in American history and how it has become the most controversial drop of documents ever. This makes everything Watergate, all the scandals look like nonsense in comparison because it implicates the most powerful people in the entire world, and they're actively trying to hide it and cover up things because they released too much. For example, like not fully redacting PDFs to where you can just copy the text and then paste it in another document. Dumb! On November 18th, 2025, the House floor was the same battleground that it had been for years. Political parties spent hours playing the blame game about why things were taking so long and why things aren't affordable and whether or not the word affordable is a Democrat psyop. For months, the Epstein Files Transparency Act had been stalled. Dinosaurs were still busy pointing fingers at each other over who was responsible, rather than just shutting the f*** up and getting on with it. President Trump, who'd repeatedly claimed the files would expose his political enemies like Bill Clinton and had stated he'd release the documents ahead of the 2024 election, had also then not so privately opposed the bill, calling it a Democratic hoax. The Trump White House said that helping Thomas Massey and the efforts to release the files would be viewed as a very hostile act to the administration, which is, I'm guilty. That's how that translates. By the way, I'm very unbiased. Republican leadership blocked it from coming to a vote, but then something bizarre happened, guys. Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican, filed a discharge petition in September 2025 to force the vote. And by November 12th, the petition had collected 218 signatures, the minimum required to force the vote. Oh my God, something's gonna happen! Be quiet! I'm working! 4 Republicans and every Democrat in the House had signed on. These 4 Republicans were the ones who signed, just for your information. I don't know why that's important, but I've really been getting into lists lately, making lists of names of people in the government who vote on certain bills and don't. Now, with this moving forward, because apparently our government still has checks and balances, Trump dropped his opposition to this all coming out. And this, by the way, is a terrible look when the bill came to the floor. The final vote wasn't even close. 427 members voted yes. Exactly 1 congressman, Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana, voted no. And he said that he was worried the release might harm innocent people mentioned in the investigation, which that is a fair worry, I guess, and that requires a lot of context, and you're voting yes or no, your track record, yes. Did you just vote yes? Of course. We'll solve this later. People don't want the blood of the innocents and the victims. They want the blood of the pedophile cabal that is apparently incumbent in our administration in this country. Not just the political administration, but I mean the literal administrative power that controls everything that we do, whether it be corporate, scholarly, there's everybody of all likes and kinds. Noam Chomsky, for example. To really critique wealth, capitalism, and corruption, you have to rub shoulders with it. It seems like. Either way, Clay seemed like he's trying to take the high road, but what do the victims want? The victims are among those calling for the release of all the files. So, sorry, Clay, you're kind of completely a minority and looking really suspicious right about now. Although I'm trying to use my brain to see it not so suspiciously. But once again, the Senate passed it unanimously and Trump signed it on November 19th. And that means that Clay Higgins is the only motherfucker who didn't approve the release of the Epstein files. After this, the deadline is set 30 days to release all unclassified records related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The law required the Attorney General to make everything publicly available in a searchable and downloadable format. It also required something else: an unredacted list of all government officials and politically exposed persons named in the files to be given directly to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. For victims who'd spent years fighting for accountability, it seemed like a breakthrough. Everyone implicated, if they're in some form of power, their names cannot be redacted. That being said, there were still things that were permitted to be withheld from the release: personally identifiable information of victims, child sexual abuse material, items that would potentially jeopardize active federal investigations and ongoing prosecution, images of death, abuse, and injury. Also, information specifically authorized under criteria established by an executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy. Essentially, if he was a CIA or Mossad agent, they're gonna protect that, obviously. That's what that means, though. But this is what the law explicitly said could not be withheld. And this is crucial because it's the standard that the DOJ was legally required to meet. No record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. It specifically prohibited hiding information because it might harm someone's reputation. So basically, get losers. It specifically named government officials and public figures as people that redactions could not protect. Section 3 went even further. It required the Attorney General to submit within 15 days a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons named or referenced in the release materials. Another one of those lists I'd love to get my hands on. And the key part of that is with no redactions permitted. So give us all the names and you can't redact any of them. And that from the bottom to the top passed all of our forms of government, all of our different beautiful little branches, the House, the Senate, the executive. Trumpenheimer signed off on it. We are going to get an unredacted list of every politician and public figure in the Epstein files. That is what Congress demanded and what was signed executively. It's what 427 motherfuckers voted for, and we voted for them to do this type of stuff. That is what the law requires. Now, remember that when we look at what the Department of Justice, whatever the actually released, because the gap between what the law demanded and what the public received isn't even disappointing. It is criminal. It is literally criminal. There should be tarring and feathering, dude. My Christmas was incredible, but it was ruined because we have criminals walking around on land that's paid for by our tax dollars. It makes me levitate with anger and rage and, I don't know, some other strange feeling. A feeling of really wanting a lot of lists of all these people. All the names of just these people on lists. I really like lists all of a sudden. To understand why this release matters so much, you have to go way back to 2008. Police in Palm Beach, Florida had been investigating Jeffrey Epstein since 2005. Case started when a parent reported that Epstein had sexually abused their 14-year-old daughter. By 2008, the FBI had identified numerous additional victims. But instead of facing federal charges despite a 60-count indictment being drafted, Epstein got what prosecutors would later call the infamous sweetheart deal, with Alexander Acosta being the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, appointed by George W. Bush. Acosta approved a non-prosecution agreement that shut down the FBI's investigation entirely. And under the terms, Epstein pled guilty to 2 state charges: solicitation of prostitution, one involving a minor. He was sentenced to 18 months in a county jail, and he served 13 of them in a private wing and was allowed to leave for 12 hours a day on work release to his Palm Beach office. During that time, it was reported that he continued to fly women in for sex at his office despite being under the watchful eye of officers, state chaperone officers who treated him like a VIP. It is absolutely disgusting and completely criminal. The sweetheart deal that Epstein got granted him immunity from all federal charges and also gave immunity to 4 named co-conspirators and any unnamed potential co-conspirators. The victims were not consulted, and regarding this, many of them didn't even know the deal had been struck until it was already done. Former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig called it completely unprecedented.
More than highly unusual, I would call it completely unprecedented. I don't know that I've ever seen a deal that lenient in a case.
That's because there hasn't been one, because there's only one Jeffrey Epstein and there's only one guy with as much power and blackmail as him. It's never happened before, at least in our version of Rome. And then in 2019, a federal judge ruled the agreement was illegal. Then, Judge Kenneth Mara found that Acosta's office had violated the Crimes Victims' Rights Act by failing to notify victims about the deal before it was finalized. In fact, the judge ruled that Acosta illegally hid the deal from the victims. But by then, we're only 6 months before Jeffrey Epstein would be murdered in prison. He'd been arrested on new federal charges in July of 2019 and was soon found dead in his Manhattan jail cell a month later on August 10th, with the medical examiner ruling it a sewer slide. Conspiracy theories have persisted ever since. He was definitely murdered though, for sure. There is no doubt. And Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate, was arrested a little later in 2020 and convicted of sex trafficking in December 2021. She is currently serving a 20-year sentence and pretty much has a sweetheart deal. She's just chilling in Texas, to be honest. But anyway, the only other person ever connected to the sex trafficking of minors with Epstein was Jean-Luc Brunel, a French modeling scout who died in prison of an apparent sewer slide, an apparent murder. Self-murder. I don't really know. There is still an objective question that has haunted this whole investigation and case for over a decade that remains unanswered still to this day. Who else was involved? This file release was supposed to answer that, finally. Who were those other co-conspirators back in 2008 that were part of the sweetheart deal that received immunity? Who were those people? I'm sure they were good people. December 19th, 2025, 30 days after Trump signed the law, the Justice Department announced its release that morning on Twitter. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche sent a letter to Congress explaining the approach. The files would go up on a new website called the Epstein Library, and they would be available for everyone to parse through. But anyone expecting full transparency, it was about to be disappointed for some reason. How can we ever expect transparency from our government, guys? Let's be real. And I'm not just talking about the current administration. There's a long violent history here. There is not a time in which there is transparency with our government. There isn't. Maybe this. But unfortunately, all we have left of this is a memorial mug of this man. Maybe this guy right here. Yes, that's gum, okay? It's really old, but still has flavor. Delicious. I like JFK. I like him a lot, all right? How about the PT-109? He was a war hero. He was a war hero, and he was a little weak and frail. But he was also on the Harvard swim team. There was a guy who got burned up. The PT-109 was a torpedo boat that got split in two. All right, he saved a guy's life. He swam with a guy to an island, and they just, are you kidding me? That was a president at one time? And then he also said, no, I'm not gonna shoot down a drone aircraft and blame it on the Cubans and get us into World War III? He said no to that, and then everybody else was like, we'll kill you. And then they shot him? You're telling me there was a guy like that? Makes me want to pull on my beast toy. Makes me want to pull on my beast toy. The release was partial. Blanche said the department would continue uploading files on a rolling basis over the coming weeks. When asked why they couldn't meet the deadline Congress had set, he cited the need to protect victims. Okay, guys, he cited that need. The material that we released on Friday is exactly what the statute requires us to release.
The material that we released on Friday, or the material that we're going to release over the next couple of weeks, is exactly what the statute requires us to release.
Blanche later said on NBC's Meet the Press,
the reason why we are still reviewing documents and still continuing our process is simply that, to protect victims.
Now, the numbers don't meet the meaningless rhetoric, the hot diarrhea flowing out of this man's hole. CBS News analyzed the initial release and found that 550 pages were completely blacked out. No partial redactions, just black. No names with black bars over them, just black. One series of 3 consecutive documents totaling 255 pages was entirely redacted. Every single page was covered with a black box. The 4th document, labeled Grand Jury New York, ran 119 pages, and all of them were solid black. The 119-page document turned out to be the transcript from the grand jury proceedings against Ghislaine Maxwell. The DOJ claimed it was released in a separate batch on Saturday with minimal redactions, but by then, the damage is already done. You are clearly hiding, picking and choosing. This is not about victims. This is about saving face. And it's completely illegal. You're violating the law. Who goes to jail when the government just violates the law? You get the secret police going and knocking on people's doors because they have a gun that's an inch too short, or because they've been living here for too long without the right papers or whatever the But when these fools in Washington do this and they violate the law objectively, that everybody wants, there's no consequences, guys. There's no consequences. There's no tarring. There's no feathering. Why not? It is a complete and total transparency failure. No redactions based on embarrassment. Remember, guys, no redactions based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. Yet, the Deputy AG Blanche's letter to Congress admitted using deliberative process privilege, work product privilege, and executive branch deliberations as justifications for redactions. Oh, the law Congress passed demands explicitly as well the release of the DOJ's internal communications. So what the f are the privileges that AG Blanche cited? The Epstein Files Transparency Act was designed to override those privileges. Representative Ro Khanna said Pam Bondi is breaking the law, and this is the corrupt system, the Epstein class that people are sick of. She didn't say failing to meet the spirit of the law. She said breaking it. That is an accusation of criminal conduct against the sitting attorney general made by a sitting member of Congress. By the way, the sitting member of Congress was elected. The AG was appointed. Then on Saturday, the problems got even worse. NPR identified more than a dozen files from Friday's release that were no longer accessible by Saturday afternoon. They'd been available one day, then gone the next with no public notice. But of course, there were some young geniuses out there scraping the PDFs and downloading them all, and they're all backed up, and the original versions are all saved. I don't know anyone who would do that, but I don't have them on a server at my house. I don't have that. I'm not that interested. I was visiting my family. It was Christmas time. One of the missing files is a particularly notable file, document EFTA 0000468, Pedophile. It was a photograph showing Trump's image on a desk among other photographs. The photo appeared to have been taken in one of Epstein's properties, and the Trump photo had been visible on Friday, but by Saturday afternoon, it was gone. Now, the Justice Department said it had temporarily removed the image for further review at the request of the Southern District of New York, and the photo was restored on Sunday without any alteration or redaction, but the brief and sudden removal of such things tends to fuel accusations of a cover-up because we're witnessing that in real time, and they just can't stop. You can't stop it. They're already, the cat's out of the bag. You have to make sure that they're released. You can't unrelease stuff. That's not how that works, on the internet at least. Senator Chuck Schumer called the handling one of the biggest cover-ups in American history. I think it objectively is. I think that there's nothing that's ever come close, and there's people's entire careers and lives that have been ruined. For example, Watergate, Contra, Iran-Contra. This is small fry compared to this. Those are small fries, all right? By the way, Oliver North, seen him at the vet's office once, Northern Virginia. Saw Oliver North in there. Come on now. Come on, dude. I was like, how's that Iran-Contra thing going there, buddy? I was like 16 years old. I didn't say anything about Iran-Contra. It's probably one of the most confusing happenings in the American government of all time. I recommend looking up Sean Munger's video on it. There's a video, it's like 3 hours long. It's really good. I think his name's Sean Munger. He's a History Channel. Anyways, guys, sorry, but there's good channels out there that make excellent content that are not mine, if you want to go check some of that out. Representative Jamie Raskin was slightly more direct than old Charlie Schumer. I mean Chuck. He characterized the removals as covering up things that Donald Trump doesn't want to go public. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but seems kind of obvious there. The DOJ denied any political motivation for any of this. They said, there's no effort to hold back or not hold back because of that, Blanche said about Trump's mentions in the files, which is hilarious coming from him, a criminal. But the disappearing files weren't the only evidence of incompetence, or something potentially even worse. While the DOJ was busy removing and restoring documents from its official website, CoffeeZilla discovered that the FBI had accidentally left approximately 11,000 documents accessible through an unindexed URL. That is a Uniform Resource Locator. The files were internally labeled Volume 8, and the FBI didn't yet intend for them to be made public. Coffee and the team he's working with at both Gmail and DropSite.
It wasn't like indexable on search, but you could just type in the specific URL and it would just come up. You could download the entire zip file, and that's what we did.
Discovered this unreleased data set by guessing predictable URL patterns to access the files which were on the site but not posted to the publicly available registry. Basically their little intranet that they forgot to turn off. By the way, this is the same DOJ that claimed it needed 200 lawyers to review documents carefully, but just left pages open. Anyone with basic technical knowledge could just walk through. You could just guess. You could type in the URL wrong and you could see this stuff. What the hell? Guys, guess what? It gets worse. Many of the redacted documents were redacted improperly. Black boxes were placed over the text, but the data beneath them remained. What that meant is that anyone viewing these pages could simply highlight, click, and drag the text, including the redacted sections, copy it, paste it into something like Notepad or Microsoft Word, or send it to an email to your grandmother or something like that, and you could just read the redacted information. Some of the reporting called the people who were doing this hackers, but it is more appropriate to call it blatant and embarrassing carelessness and unbelievable lack of skill and executive mental function from the people involved in the release of these files. The government spent 9 months reviewing the files with over 200 lawyers and spent millions of taxpayer dollars, but it took us just copying and pasting it to undo that work. What? Now, Volume 8 was made publicly available shortly after its discovery and exposure by CoffeeZilla, but obviously the damage is done at that point. Time and time again, they have revealed how incompetent they are. Now, the incompetence is clear, or maybe someone wanted these files to be discovered and wanted a way to maintain plausible deniability when they were officially released. Because if anything, I mean, look at it, it's just like, whoever did this is either an idiot or they're just pretty transparent. They're just pro-transparency. I tell you what, quite a few people probably got fired though. By Sunday, the lawmakers who had written the transparency law were furious, as you could probably imagine. Representative Thomas Massie, the Kentucky Republican who'd forced the vote with his discharge petition, went on CBS's Face the Nation. He said that he was considering inherent contempt against Attorney General Pam Bondi. He said, "I think the most expeditious way to get justice for these victims is to bring inherent contempt against Pam Bondi." He suggested Bondi could face daily fines or even possible obstruction of justice charges if the full files weren't released. Representative Ro Khanna, the California Democrat who'd co-sponsored the bill with Massie, said he was considering filing impeachment articles. I say do it, dude. I say the higher the turnover rate for these dumbasses, the better for the American people. Maybe we can get some young people in there for once. I'm just kidding. That has nothing to do with anything. It genuinely does not. There's plenty of really good old people. Believe me, I know some of them. Believe me, I know some good olds. I know some good olds. The two men came from opposite ends of the political spectrum, and they'd worked together to pass a law with 427 votes, and now they were united again in demanding its enforcement. Senator Rand Paul recommended a simpler approach. My suggestion would be give up all the information. Release it. Yeah, sure, that makes perfect sense. Why not? Just do that. Do that, Rand Paul. His father, one of the very few good olds, to be honest with you. And he's really old. That guy's really old. I used to love Ron Paul so much. Oh my God. Ron Paul, dude. Such an old grouchy curmudgeon. Ross Perot, he was around before my time, but I've read and learned about him plenty. He's a legend. He actually bought, my family used to have a farm in Maryland that was then sold to Ross Perot, and he built a Six Flags on it. So I have family members that are buried under a Six Flags in Maryland. How crazy is that? It was my dad's brother's farm. So Ross Perot bought it. Anyways, guys, I'm sorry, press the like button. In only the American system can a law designed to bring transparency produce more questions than answers. That seems to be the American way. The files that were supposed to expose the powerful were themselves being protected by those same exact powers. Despite the redactions, the files that were released did contain some new information. Some of it was new, okay? Some of it had confirmed what we had long suspected. Documents included photographs, interviews, transcripts, call logs, court records, and other materials spanning nearly 2 decades of federal scrutiny of Jeffrey Epstein. House Democrats released 19 photos from approximately 95,000 images obtained from the Epstein estate, with additional images released later. The photos showed a who's who of influential figures from politics, entertainment, business, and tech. Bill Clinton appeared in multiple photos, and additional photos captured him on a 2002 trip to Africa with actor Kevin Spacey. The photos don't show Clinton doing anything illegal, but they contradicted statements he'd made over the years, the statements downplaying his relationship with Epstein. And to be clear, Clinton has never been accused of any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein from victims. Clinton's spokesman said after the release of all these files in a statement that essentially accused the Trump administration of using Clinton as a political weapon. This goes really hard, to be honest. The White House hasn't been hiding these files for months, only to dump them late on a Friday to protect Bill Clinton, said Angel, spokesman of Bill Clinton. This is about shielding themselves from what comes next, or from what they'll try and hide forever. Whoa. I don't like any of these people. That's pretty hard, though, to be honest. Further in the statement, they divided Epstein's associates into 2 groups. The first group knew nothing and cut Epstein off before his crimes came to light, and the second group continued relationships with him after they said the Clintons are in the first group. And I said, what about Haiti? The Clinton spokesman later called for the DOJ to release any remaining materials involving Clinton, saying the former president has nothing to hide, which genuinely is an impressive level of confidence, and I wish everybody implicated in these files would just get out right ahead of it and say, release it all, I have nothing to hide. But it seems like they've all got a lot to hide, or they would just do that. I believe that Bill Clinton doesn't have anything to hide in regard to that. Still the president of the United States, still a sexual pervert, still a freak, still don't like him at all, still hate all of these people. So the Department of Justice, for its part, said there was no evidence to predicate further investigations into uncharged third parties, such as Clinton, based on the release of the files. So Clinton's solid. The celebrity photos are something else. Clinton wasn't the only famous face in the files. The released photos showed connections between Epstein and a wide range of new public figures, some familiar, some unfamiliar. Photos don't imply wrongdoing by any of these individuals. Obviously, many of them show nothing more than social interactions at events or locations. Donald Trump appeared in multiple photos. One showed his image on a desk in what appears to be an Epstein property. A message slip indicated Trump had called Epstein at some point. A photo of a $22,500 check with Trump's signature was included. And it's actually another angle of the picture included in the Epstein birthday book, which also contained a novelty-sized check for $22,500, which the Trump administration had denied. Epstein is wearing the same black shirt with an American flag on the arm, but while the birthday book image covered the USA on the shirt, the new picture, the frame picture, has the check held lower, which exposes the USA, and both pictures have a redacted woman in black. Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, defended the president. He's not in the file doing anything awful. Well, Susie Wiles, according to a supposed FBI tip intake form associated with case ID SOD New York 3027571, located within the Epstein files release, it is alleged that Trump did something quite terrible. By the way, alleged. This is really bad, and it is really alleged. The document quotes a person claiming to be a former limousine driver who stated a woman had told him he me in reference to Trump, and that Donald J. Trump had her along with Jeffrey Epstein. The driver claimed he overheard Trump on a phone call in 1995 referencing someone named Jeffrey and abusing some girl. And this is distinct from a previously known 2016 lawsuit in which a woman using the pseudonym Jane Doe alleged that Trump and Epstein her when she was 13 years old at Epstein's Manhattan residence in 1994. That lawsuit was filed in April 2016, refiled multiple times, and voluntarily dismissed on November 4th, 2016, days before the election, reportedly after the plaintiff received threats. Reportedly. The 2025 files contain a different account, an unverified secondhand allegation from a 2020 tipster. The DOJ addressed this preemptively, posting on X. By the way, that's where they post. Some of the documents contain sensationalist claims made against President Trump that were submitted to FBI before 2020 election. To be clear, the claims are unfounded and false. The FBI intake form does not indicate whether the tip was ever investigated or corroborated. Its existence isn't evidence of wrongdoing, as it's unverified raw intelligence. That being said, it still raises some questions. Why does this get a preemptive denial when things we'll soon discuss do not? Remember, guys, you have to be consistent morally, spiritually, intellectually. You have to be consistent. You cannot be a hypocrite. If you jump the fence too many times, you might get impaled by it. Oh, nasty Steve Bannon appeared in several photos, including one with Epstein behind a desk and another showing both men taking a selfie in a mirror. Emails showed Bannon had corresponded frequently with Jeffrey Epstein. Bannon had reportedly been working on an unreleased documentary about Epstein to rehabilitate his image. Through the documentary, it was paid for by Epstein. So that's an epic win. Great job. Bill Gates appeared in some photos, one with Prince Andrew, another outside a private plane, and two more with women whose identities are redacted. Gates later issued a statement and said, "I was foolish to spend any time with him. Just a huge mistake." Other names in the photos include Woody Allen, Alan Dershowitz, who was Epstein's lawyer, Richard Branson, shown on a beach, Mick Jagger, David Copperfield was pictured with Maxwell, Prince Andrew was laying across a line of redacted individuals who was later stripped of his royal titles for his relationship with Epstein and multiple allegations made against him. Total freakazoid. One controversy did arise over photos of Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. Initial reports suggested that the faces redacted in the image were those of Epstein's victims, but closer examination revealed that the redacted faces were actually their children in a 2003 photo that was already publicly known. And the lack of context for so many photos with no dates, no locations, and no explanations of the circumstances make them very challenging to interpret, and in a Transparency Act, it's kind of like this is not transparency, guys. It's really not. A photo of someone with Epstein doesn't prove anything on its own. Nothing. A significant question is, what happened when the cameras weren't rolling? Who are these co-conspirators that were granted immunity? We need to know this type of stuff. Photos with Jeffrey Epstein. Everybody has a photo with Jeffrey Epstein, apparently. except for me. So obviously, the celebrity photos were not the most significant revelation. Buried in the files were FBI emails that named some names, not just people photographed with Epstein, but people the FBI was actively investigating as potential co-conspirators in regard to Epstein. An FBI email from July 9th, 2019, just weeks before Epstein's death, referenced 10 co-conspirators the agency was tracking. The email from the Crimes Against Children Human Trafficking Unit noted that 3 had been located in Florida and served grand jury subpoenas. Others were found in Boston, New York, and Connecticut, and then there was this line. One is a wealthy businessman in Ohio. Related email from July 7th was more specific about who this businessman may have been, saying, I do not know about Ohio contacting Wexner. This is Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works. Wexner is a man who had previously given Epstein power of attorney over his entire fortune, and the $77 million Manhattan mansion where many of Epstein's victims were abused was previously owned by Wexner before being transferred to Epstein for reasons and an amount that remain unclear until this day. Similarly, Epstein's private jet, known as Lolita Express, was also previously owned by Les Wexner before it was transferred to Epstein in 2001 for an unknown amount. Emails sent on July 26, 2019 to Sigrid McCauley, an attorney who represented Virginia Giuffre, an Epstein victim, also details how dozens of phone numbers were listed for Wexner in Epstein's little black book for various properties he owned, staff at those properties, and other executives at Wexner's companies. By the way, Wexner pretty closely tied into old Abercrombie and Fitch, which is a video that's coming next week. Wexner's attorney claimed the assistant U.S. attorney stated at the time that Wexner was neither a co-conspirator nor a target, but that raises its own questions. If he wasn't a target, why was the FBI discussing whether to contact him in the same emails about co-conspirators? Why was he included in that conversation at all? Wexner is tied in with a lot of freaks. In October 2024, Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, whom Wexner hired in 1992, was arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking. Jeffries allegedly used a network to lure young men to sex events between 2008 and 2015. The world is full of disgusting, powerful people. There is no documented direct link between Wexner and Jeffries' alleged crimes. This guy just happens to rub shoulders with evil fuckers, apparently, sex traffickers. Wexner signed Epstein's 50th birthday card in 2003 with a drawing of a naked woman, and this was years after Epstein's behavior should have been apparent to anyone who was paying attention, and the initial federal investigation began in 2005, 2 years after that. So, Les Wexner has long been speculated to be one of the co-conspirators in Epstein's trafficking, but no undeniable evidence has ever been discovered. It's all just coincidence and the connection to brands and individuals who have reputations for abuse and reputations for preying on men and women alike. So think of that however you want, but the question about what was in the files pales in comparison to a more fundamental question. Could we even trust that these documents are authentic, that they're real? A letter within volume 8 of the Epstein documents went viral immediately after it was discovered because Jeffrey Epstein allegedly wrote it to Larry Nassar, the USA gymnastics doctor that was convicted of sexually abusing hundreds of young athletes and sentenced to 40 to 125 years in prison in 2018. The letter referenced our president, Donald Trump, sharing our love of young nubile girls. Within hours, the DOJ declared it was likely fake in a tweet, stating they were looking into the letter's validity and citing 3 pieces of evidence for its inauthenticity. Postmark on the envelope is Virginia, not New York, where Epstein was jailed at the time it was written and sent. The return address listed is the wrong jail for Epstein and didn't include his inmate number, which is a requirement for outgoing mail, and the envelope was processed 3 days after Epstein's death. So they just have fake shit in the Epstein files. There's some of it's just not real, it's fake. The FBI knew about these problems for years. The letter was discovered in September of 2019 by a Bureau of Prison Special Investigative Section lieutenant when it was returned to the sender. On July 31st, 2020, 4.5 years before being released to the public, the FBI requested a handwriting analysis to determine if it was actually legitimate. Although the document requesting handwriting analysis is available, the results are not. Conspiracy theorists may claim that's because the results would say that it is authentic and they can't let that get out. But another option is that the deadline to deliver the results was October 30th, 2020 to arrive in time for the trial, but Epstein dies 10 days after the analysis was requested on August 10th, 2019. So the DOJ had 200 lawyers reviewing documents for victims' names and redactions, but no one thought to flag a letter that they'd known was suspicious and possibly inauthentic since 2019. Guys, no one created a system to mark documents of questionable authenticity before just dumping them to the public. 1 point for incompetency. And if this letter's fake, how many other documents are just fabricated? Why is there a fake letter? For survivors who'd spent years pushing for transparency, I cannot imagine how this release feels. It's got to feel like a massive betrayal at a level the likes of which have never even been seen. Then there's a cover-up and so on and so forth. Marina Lacerda was 14 when she was abused by Epstein, and she became a key witness in the 2019 investigation that led to his arrest and then murder. The drop of the redacted files disappointed her massively. You can see by this quote. Lacerda also pointed out that many of the photos that were released seemed irrelevant to actually understanding Epstein's crimes. Various victims searched released files for documents that they knew should exist, their own victim statements, records of their calls to FBI tip lines, but the victims could not find them. Then, one survivor who had only ever identified herself anonymously as Jane Doe throughout all legal proceedings discovered her real name appeared unredacted multiple times in the released files. So not only did they not redact, it's so unbelievable. Unbelievably unfair to everyone involved, except for the people who were actually implicated. The same Department of Justice that blacked out 119 pages of grand jury testimony, which should be available, supposedly to protect victims, left a Jane Doe's real name unredacted multiple times. They protected the testimony while exposing the testifier. Attorneys Brad Edwards and Brittany Henderson, who represent over 200 survivors, confirmed that a sealed document from a civil litigation containing the names of more than 24 alleged victims was posted without any redactions. The document was supposed to be sealed, it was supposed to be confidential, but instead it was uploaded to a public government website with every single name visible. A bunch of politicians got their names scrubbed and redacted, and actual victims did not. Somehow, dude. I could understand if everything was unredacted and like, oh my God, there's so many victims now that are out here. This is terrible. This is having unintended consequences. But no, you are redacting shit that just shouldn't be redacted at all. And you're not redacting things that should. And you're saying the reason you don't want to release the files is because you want to protect the victims? What? Somehow the government is failing to represent the people on every single front. They're breaking the law on every single front. On one hand, they're over redacting information about the powerful and connected, something the Transparency Act explicitly prohibits. And on the other hand, they're under redacting information about the victims of Epstein, which is the very people the law was supposed to protect. Clay Higgins may not be so misguided, all right? In spite of all the jokes saying to check his computer and stuff, this guy knows the government, it seems. Either way, the DOJ is not trying to protect the victims. That is very obvious and clear. Attorney General Todd Blanche defended the department's approach in multiple different interviews. On Meet the Press, he argued the release complied with the law. He said the department had assembled a team of more than 200 retarded lawyers to review the documents. They were looking for survivors' names, violent photos, child sexual abuse material, and anything that might jeopardize ongoing investigations. The DOJ claimed that no politicians' names were redacted from the files, and Blanche was emphatic in stating, "We are not redacting names of individuals or politicians unless they are a victim." Like Trump. He's a victim in all this. So the logical response to him saying they're trying to do the right thing is, why are you blacking out whole pages? You can't read anything about any of it. There's 119 pages that are just completely blacked out. How are we supposed to understand the context? How could anyone verify what is contained? The department said 1,200 people's identities had been redacted from the released files so far. It claimed the redactions covered confidential informations, privileged material, attorney work product, and executive deliberations. Everybody's mad, nobody likes it. The DOJ has promised more files would come out over the next couple weeks, but given what has happened with this first release, skepticism is certainly warranted from everyone's perspective. For anyone who has followed the Epstein case, the December 2025 release is familiar to everything else that has ever happened or come out in this entire thing. If you go back to 2008, the FBI had identified numerous victims, and the evidence is damning. But then Alexander Acosta, connected, epically powerful lawyer guy, cuts a deal with Epstein that grants him immunity and then shuts down the investigation entirely. The Justice Department's own Office of Professional Responsibility would later find that Acosta had exercised poor judgment in negotiating the deal, and they stopped short of calling it misconduct, but the damage is obviously done. Epstein walks free and has 10 more years of abusing. His victims get nothing, and Acosta went on to serve as Trump's labor secretary from 2017 to 2019. He resigned after Epstein was arrested on new charges in July of 2019. In September of 2025, Acosta testified before the House Oversight Committee for 6 hours straight, with 172 pages of transcripts being released in October. According to the committee Democrats, he continues to deny he gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal, despite cutting the investigation short and granting Epstein a non-prosecution agreement, even though 30 victims had been identified at the time. Every single time the system got close to some level of accountability, full accountability, someone intervened. Some secret deal, a suspicious death, a mountain of redaction, some magic force that we have no control over. So the question still remains somehow, what was Jeffrey Epstein actually doing in all these redacted photographs and the unredacted ones? What is the context? He is so ugly. That's all we know. He's so hard to look at. The files released in December 2025 included images from approximately 95,000 photos in Jeffrey Epstein's possession. Photos of presidents, celebrities, business titans, royalty. Many were taken at his properties, on his planes, at his parties. Why is this guy documenting everything so meticulously? One theory that's sort of all-encompassing and creates a logical explanation for that magical force that undermines all forms of accountability and has, is that Epstein is a blackmail master, a master of collecting compromising material on powerful people as insurance or as a tool for manipulation. Blackmail. Some allegedly say he did so for Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, though this theory has never been proven or disproven. What is in the several 100,000 files the DOJ is still processing? There's like 1 million they just found or some crazy shit like that. What did the grand jury hear that required 119 pages to transcribe and every single word of that transcription to be completely blacked out? Who are the potential co-conspirators in the 2008 deal that were granted immunity? And why is Ghislaine Maxwell, someone serving 20 years, gone from solitary confinement to the cushiest dig a pedophile could possibly get? Jeffrey Epstein is dead and Ghislaine Maxwell is in jail and Jean-Luc murdered himself or whatever. But the network that they allegedly ran, the pilots, the schedulers, the recruiters, the clients, all this remains largely unaccounted for. Files were supposed to answer these questions, and so far they have only raised new ones. But unfortunately, guys, that is the trend with all of this. Do not trust the government. Do not trust anyone who says, for transparency, because they're full of shit. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you guys enjoyed, there'll be more of this. I'm sure there's more files coming out. I'll see you in the next one.